might trickle in, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Bates, better known as Animal Bates, which is a pun about the diet that I follow. But don't let that fool you, because today we're going to talk about a subject that's much more than food for thought. It's about why experimental philosophy serves you better than diet dogma. I know that sounds like a little bit of a mouthful, and that's my style, but together we're going to make this idea slightly clearer than mud today. What I aim to unveil is a mindset shift, and I call that having the mind of a true scientist, or the mind of turning off my presentation.
You got it. You just had it.
Does it? Was it?
Experiment.
You know those dreams where you wake up, or rather you have the dream where you're naked in front of your presentation, you didn't know it? This has happened to me 12 times the last 2 nights. So it was meant to be. So what does it mean to have the mind of a true scientist? It's about learning by doing, by taking first-hand experiments as portals to the truth. A little background about who I am and why this convoluted thought is such a part of not only what I do in my life, but what I like to do with my clients. In a world where we have so many companies that are driven by financial incentives, things that aren't really about our health, I think a way to parse out what is real and what is facade, or maybe even predatory or fake, is by taking first-hand experiments into our hands. And I've seen this mindset alone transform the lives of thousands of individuals over the last few years, and it has directly changed my life for the better. So, the mind of a true scientist, without turning off my presentation, is nestled in a methodology that I like to call experimental philosophy. The purpose of experimental philosophy is to help you and those around you thrive. Again, by learning everything firsthand, by all the ideas we hear, putting them to the test. The framework encompasses that mindset we talked about on the slide before, and the desired outcome is to help you navigate through the plethora of ideas that we hear from all the various sources. Because as you know nowadays, there's not just one thing that is true. We have contradictory ideas, and it can get really, really difficult to navigate. So, let's set the stage. Again, who am I? Honestly, I'm not much different than everyone here in this room. I'm an avid experimenter, a collector of nuggets, I like to call them, and we'll talk about that later. I did work with a lot of fine people who are in this room in Heart and Soil for a time under Dr. Paul Saladino, and I saw a lot of anecdotes while I was there, thousands. And it's given me really unique insight to what actually helps people. And it's not so much about the diet. It's about a lot more than that. So, for those of you who are also avid experimenters and are trying to optimize your health, I want to see a show of hands. Who would classify themselves that way? Wow, it's like we're at a conference called Hack Your Health. Show of hands, who has tried different diets, lifestyles, workouts, experiments? Okay. Keep your hands up if at one point you thought, however you were living or practicing something was the way to do it, and the other ways were wrong. Definitely me. Now keep your hands up, or raise them again, if you are living the exact same way that you thought used to be the right way to do it. You're the man. The truth about, going backwards on our presentation, the truth about what we used to believe to be true is that wasn't perfect. And that what we believe now, we likely would have vehemently argued against earlier in life. Which, by the transitive property, means that somewhere in the future we'll look back at this exact moment and disagree with what we believe now. So instead of being entrenched in these beliefs permanently and being ignorant to the gems and the hidden truths that we discover along the way, I'm just proposing that maybe we take that into account and operate under that framework continuously. So, if you would all check under your chairs, I have a little tool for our journey ahead. I see some puzzled expressions. There is nothing there. What? Have you ripped off the label to your chair? That is not what we're using. Oh man, we're gonna have some sandwiches. I will not get asked to come back. Okay, so sorry about that. There's a lot of nothing there, and that is exactly what we'll be using. I want you to take all of your preconceived notions about health, all of your biases, anything you have conviction on, and replace it with all that nothing you found under your head. Go ahead. Do it. I'm watching all of you. Thank you, Doug. Now, we are going to talk about a framework that challenges a lot of what we believe to be true. And if you don't accept that challenge, that's okay. This isn't going to do a lot for you. You can set this aside somewhere safe for now. You don't need to walk or anything. You don't have to hold it up there. Just make a scene. So, where did our beliefs about health originate from? They weren't spontaneously impregnated in our minds. We had to choose from a plethora of ideas what we wanted to try. It was cultivated through many options and a choice of what to experiment with. So, before we get into the next bit, I've been told that it can be very jarring to an audience to experience a lot of analogies because it's difficult to keep up with. I have settled for 3. I was advised to only have 1 during my presentation, and I desired a lot more than that. So I hope that the transitions are a lot more like an exhilarating roller coaster instead of a jarring car crash, but you can let me know after which they were. Life is like a box of chocolates, and it is also like poker, specifically Texas Hold'em, because we're in Texas, y'all. For those of you who are not familiar, in Texas Hold'em, each player is dealt 2 cards. These cards are known only to them. They could be unique to them. They should be unique to them unless someone's cheating. The table cards are laid over each hand, and there's 5 of them on the table. This is shared information for all the players. The chips, players use those to wager on whether or not they think their hand and the corresponding cards on the table will actually result in beating the other hands, and that helps them accumulate more chips. So how, in the land of longhorn and livers, is this related to health? Poker is like wagering your finite resources on health ideas. You have to try things to know if they can work for you or if they don't. Time, attention, money, anything that is valuable to you and that is a finite resource would represent chips. Now, your discernment tools to figure out if the health idea is laid out before you, which might be those cards at the table, right? It could be ideas from a podcast, from a book, maybe something that someone you know has experimented, a diet, a lifestyle they try. Ideas you get here at this conference, those are all the cards at the table. And you have 2 cards in your hand to help you discern which one of those cards on the table is important to you, which one of those things you want to try. And these 2 cards in your hand represent your experience and your intuition, and they are your only tools that will let you know what is real and what is fake, or maybe not for you, on the table. So, in order to test a health idea, an ideology, you have to invest your chips. And again, that's scary. It's a finite resource. You can only invest in so many hands until you're out of the game. But you do have to risk your chips in order to gain insight, to see if something works for you, to see if there's truth behind that idea. And I understand that it can be scary to invest your chips. And we'll talk about a few of the different outcomes from investing your chips. Option 1, you could be cavalier and careless. You could bet recklessly, just be like, yeah, I got this. Every single hand, here are all my chips. I'm going to win every hand. The probability of you winning every hand is obviously extremely low. Otherwise, everyone would play poker and we would all be millionaires. So, in this scenario, if you are betting recklessly, you will likely get in a scarcity mindset. You'll be low on time, low on attention, all those other resources. And not only that, but your stress levels will be through the roof. The likeliness of you thinking that people who are genuinely out to help you, and that's the case, is going to be very low. Instead, you'll view most health ideas or most people selling you something or offering to help as someone who's predatory, after your chips, after your finite resources. So that's option 1. I don't suggest playing that way. Option 2, you could play despite the house. The game's rigged. Screw it. I'm going to fold every hand. Okay. Folding each hand yields no rewards. You learn nothing. You gain nothing. And worse, you will lose chips steadily anyway because you have to pay blinds to stay in the game. The third option, my personal favorite, you use your intuition and your experience, those two cards in your hand, and you bet on the cards on the table that intuitively and based off your experience feel right to you. You wager on those experiments and you take action on those outlines. Keep picking up this thing. I don't like having it in my hand. So, the questions for this analogy. All right, Bates, which hands do we bet on and which do we fold? Again, it comes back to our intuition and our experience, and we'll talk more about that later. Switching gears, another roller coaster transition. Let's consider a scenario. Person A and person B. They both transitioned from a vegan to a carnivore diet. 6 months into it, though, person A starts to experience all of these things. It's not a good concoction, and I've seen it happen a lot. Person B, however, after the same 6 months, feels pretty great. They lose weight, they don't have any of the problems that person A is struggling with. Take a moment to consult the vast nothingness that we instilled in our brains earlier. Who here believes in this scenario that person A is doing the right thing? Show of hands. And who believes that person B is doing the right thing? The answer is that neither of them are. But neither of them are wrong either. So you all that raise your hands are not either. They are each experiencing a partial truth. It's not entirely impossible that they are getting slivers of the reality from each of their different perspectives. They likely agree on 99% of things, like they might be anti-big pharma, anti-big food. They probably believe that the pyramids are landing pads for flying saucers. But that 1% they disagree on holds them back. It keeps them from seeing the value from the other perspective. Jordan Peterson shares an incredible insight. People he is initially declined to dismiss, he sees as an opportunity. It's a trigger for him to say, okay, what does this person know that I don't? Somewhere amidst this individual is a gem that I'm ignorant to. And he uses this initial dismissal and shifts it, and it becomes a quest, an exploration for treasure. And I really love that notion, and I think it would behoove us to have a similar mindset when it comes to health. So back to our scenario. Put yourself in the shoes of a person C. Somebody who wants to learn from person A, person B. You want to avoid pitfalls, and you hear both their stories. They somewhat resonate with you, but you're not sure what you should do. Should you do what they did or what they did? The answer, in my opinion, is try both. Which is precisely how this relates to experimental philosophy, serving you better than diet dog. The crowd goes wild. Thank you. Settle down. Settle down. You might be like, okay, Bates, how about you settle down? That implies I need to try everything. Why should I try all of these things? I think you should experiment voraciously, maybe even endlessly. Okay, Bates, but couldn't it be harmful if I experiment? Couldn't some things actually damage my health? Possibly. But is it more harmful to take inaction, or rather take no action? Couldn't that be more detrimental in the long run than at least trying something? I don't think it'll kill you to experiment. Which reminds me, right next to the nothing, under your chairs, there was a waiver. Please sign that. It absolves me of any liability for experiments you might do on. Back to the questions. Bates, aren't humans more alike than they are different? Yes, I do believe so. But isn't it true that humans can inhabit vastly different circumstances? And couldn't that change the equation of our perspective of health? What about axiomatic truths, Bates? Basically, truths that are certainly true. Like a vegan diet. Isn't that universally bad? Perhaps. But what about a diet that is saturated with seed oils, full of processed foods? Isn't there a gradient? Isn't there nuance in these things worth exploring? What about well-researched truths, Bates? You mean like when babies absolutely had to sleep in their stomach, and then they're back, and then their stomach again? Or about how fat was a bad guy, and it was all fat's fault, and then it was carbs' fault? I just think there's some nuance in all of those things. Okay, Bates, let's assume that this is true, and there's something to this experimental philosophy thing, yada yada. Doesn't this mean we'll never see the full picture? And to that, I would echo Inspector Clouseau from the movie Pink Panther 2. We know nothing. You are now up to speed. And I believe that's the truth. And that concludes my presentation. It really doesn't. But I do believe that that is a really complex part of this. Speaking of complex, my question for you all is, why do we not celebrate individual progress as opposed to what actually happens, where we become polarized about very complex issues that include numerous variables? If, like that other slide, everything is a fragment of the truth, why can't we view it that way? And if you're looking for anybody to have all the answers, they don't exist. I don't have the answers, Dylan doesn't have the answers, Courtney might have the answers because she's my girlfriend. But the point is, not anyone here at this conference, not nobody has the answers. Are you all still with me? Yeah. Waiting for nodding heads, shaking heads? Do we have a few of these? Okay. So this means that we have to embrace the unknown. So let us buckle up for the second of three analogies. If I can get the right slide. Were we here? Yeah. Cool. Puzzles. I love puzzles. Consider this. You are trying to put together a puzzle. But the box doesn't have the completed picture on the outside like it does for most, because then the analogy wouldn't work, so I don't take it out. So, picture the cards we were talking about on the poker table before, right? These are the ideas we're exposed to about health from various sources, like podcasts, influencers, books, maybe personal experience, people who we know their experience. Instead of cards, those are puzzle pieces instead. And there's a lot more than 5 of them, so this is a more appropriate analogy. We have to use our hands to put a puzzle together. So there's 2 cards we talked about before, our experience and intuition. Those become our tools to put together the puzzle. So as we take place in personal experiments and observations around us, we build this puzzle of truth out. Now, diet dogma, or any kind of polarized thinking, it acts like a blockage. You're essentially staring at one piece, trying to solve an entire puzzle. Or maybe you've tried a few things, so you have a few puzzle pieces put together. But what that really does, gives this fixed mindset. You are not able to add other pieces to the puzzle because you think you've done 4 and that's the whole thing. But there's thousands of other puzzle pieces on the side. I think if we shift a puzzle piece, or perhaps even move it, rotate it, whatnot, it puts us in a growth mindset. The utility behind this growth mindset is that as we learn new things, and invariably we will, we can adapt to see how those might fit, or even break up the puzzle pieces that we've already had that are there. Either way, there are puzzle pieces you haven't laid your hands on yet. That is a truth that I ardently believe in. So we might as well accommodate and have the flexibility to build the puzzle out as we go. Now here's a seemingly oxymoronic reminder. Just because a puzzle piece doesn't fit at first, doesn't mean it's wrong. Think about that one for a second. That might not make a lot of sense, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys thought about it for a second. Here's something to marinate on like a quality state. I really don't believe we will ever finish this puzzle. I really believe that the pieces are infinite. So, if that's true, Bates, how do we complete a jumbled, ever-evolving, constantly shifting puzzle? That's a really good question. With the experimental philosophy framework. So, it consists of 3 phases, and I don't want to go through all of these. You guys have great eyes, and I think, well, hopefully you do. And I think that the conference here is recording this, so you'll have access to it later. But I want to go through a few key sections of it. Phase 1, you establish your parameters. So you're essentially picking one of the health ideas we talked about earlier, and you're setting expectations for yourself. It's like the scientific method, but you're doing it with your body, so there's risk-reward there. Intuitive selection. A lot of people do things because they're told it's the right way to do it. I think our first filter is, are you attracted to this idea? Do you think it'll help you? Because if it's something someone else tells you to do, and in your gut, you're like, that doesn't sound right to me, probably shouldn't do it. I know it's not scientific. I don't have charts and studies and all these things to show you that you should listen to your intuition instead of what someone else tells you. But I've seen this be the case for thousands of people over the last few years. Natural alignment. Try to pick experiments that don't disrupt natural functions. Timelines are great, and you need to have a definitive timeline to understand if something works for you or not. I like to say 30 to 120 days minimum for any kind of experiment, whether that's a supplement you're adding in, a workout, a lifestyle change, shifting macros around, what have you. If you're an overachiever, you can go 6 to 12 months. That's what I did for several diets, and it's very insightful, but it's very taxing, and there's a lot that you have to do for that. Get baseline metrics. I like to get Whoop chronometer, which is like my Fitness Pal, but better. No offense, Zane, I know you love my Fitness Pal. I get my blood work from Merrick, and I also like to do habit tracking, track my lifts, all other kinds of things like that. So those are baseline metrics for me. But choose metrics that are unique to you and are special and important to the goal that you're searching for or the problem you're trying to solve. So that's going to look a little bit different for everybody. Non-negotiables, this is what I like to call canaries in the coal mine. For those of you who don't understand the analogy, coal miners used to leave canaries because they would continuously sing, but if there was some sort of gas that leaked, the canary would die. So the second that they heard the canary die, they rushed out of the mine. So non-negotiables would be your quality of life. Anything that's so important to you that if you're trying an experiment and they suffer, that you pull the cord or you readjust to make it easier to implement the experiment and to search for truth, because we don't want to sacrifice the things that are important to us while we're searching for these health truths. Now, after you get all of that established, the fun part is just taking action. It's very self-explanatory. The one thing that I'll say is the consistent execution. A lot of people here, and just in general, feel like you have to do something 100% all the time or it won't work. I haven't found that to be true. For me or for the people I've worked with, I think 80-20 is the minimum viable action or percentage of the time you can adhere to an experiment and still see some really awesome results. Plus, life is never perfect. It will throw you curveballs. You might as well proactively build in some cushion. So, after your timeline has halted, we start the phase 3, reflecting and iterating. Let's say you did it for 120 days. You would get the same metrics that you got at baseline. Whoop, chronometer, macromicrocalories, blood work, habit tracking, all those things. Then you need to sit down with you and yourself and whoever else is up here and dissect. Be your own devil's advocate. Question everything that you thought actually occurred in the experiment and why you think it might have occurred. And that is where you will draw some hypothetical conclusions. But remember, the reason they're hypothetical is they're also partial truths, just like everything else we've talked about. And you use that inertia from this experiment to do it all over again. Okay, I know, that was thick, and not the good kind either. So let me give you a few examples to actually think about how you might implement this. The first example, and these are both examples of experiments I tried. I was animal-based for about 3 years, consuming 130 to 170 grams of saturated fat a day. Felt great. Looked pretty good, right, Dylan? Thanks, man. And then I heard about this pro-metabolic thing. I was like, wow, intuitively, that sounds pretty good. I'm very active. I'm in the gym a lot. I play soccer. I play volleyball. I'm going on rucks with the dogs. It makes sense to have more carbohydrates because I'm metabolically healthy. So what I did is, maybe I can cross that with an animal-based diet. So I'm still eating under the animal-based umbrella. I'm just changing the fat and the carb intake a little bit. So I got my baselines again: Whoop, blood work, DEXA, lift markers, all that. And then I went straight into the action. I had 120 days. I was feeling pretty good, but then I got sick. And I was like, oh no. Is this because of the carbs, or did I just get sick? And it's hard to parse that out. And in the middle of experiment, it's going to be difficult to understand why things are happening. But I took action over doubt. Instead of getting stuck in analysis paralysis land, I decided to recover and then start the experiment over. And sure enough, it worked. I felt great. When I got to reflecting and iterating, me, myself, and I all got together in our little chamber of commerce. And I had to reflect on a few things. I was like, okay, I feel like we put on some muscle mass. So I feel like we have pretty good energy. And then myself was like, I get it. But me, myself, I felt like we were a little more lethargic in the middle of the day after our post-workout meal with a lot of carbohydrates. We felt like we were a little lethargic in the mornings too. And then myself was like, myself, I get it. But wasn't there a net benefit? Or maybe we should try the experiment again. And then that's how I know it's weird up there, we decided to do it all over again and tweak the experiment a little bit. So that's what I mean when sometimes your hypothetical conclusions can actually be really exciting and can lead you into your next experiment. So don't ever lose that inertia. Now, by following these principles and parameters, you'll not only successfully navigate the very difficult realm of health that has a plethora of options that you could choose from, but you'll also become a seasoned collector of nuggets. I think I told you earlier, I love collecting nuggets. What are nuggets? I call nuggets insights that we glean firsthand from taking the risk on these experiments. So, let's address the elephant in the room for this framework. She ain't flawless. I'm not some person who's been doing this for 100 years and studied ancient voodoo medicine and like this is the secret recipe to life. This is a low-stress approach, though, that's a loose framework that can help you and those that you care about take action and dissolve doubt by taking action. After all this, you might say, Bates, that's a lot. Is all this experimenting necessary? It seems exhausting. Fair point. But today's research, as we talked about before, is a little convoluted. We don't really know the why behind the why. We don't know why these companies are telling us to do certain things, why they're putting these things in our food. We don't even know if supplement companies or some people here at this conference, I'm not calling anyone out, I'm just saying in general, be wary. There's a lot of times there's an ulterior motive, and we need something we can trust, a foundation to compare that against. And I believe experimenting firsthand, and also the people that you trust, their experimentations should be that foundation we can fall back on. So instead of embodying this flawed version of science where there's these financial incentives, why don't we just embrace an open-minded framework, which is really what science should be. So, is everyone still all aboard the train, or do we have people hurling themselves off the roofs? It's okay if you are, I just want to know. All right, great for the most part. So, I want to focus on a behind-the-scenes variable of this framework. It's stress. You probably heard me say it's like all low stress, 80-20, and all these things. Why is that? Well, as I used to believe, I thought it was all about the micros and the macros and the meal timing and the biohacking and the sleep quality, the stress management, yada, yada, yada. I was like, oh, sleep, rest, I'll do that when I'm dead. I don't need to do it while I'm living. I have all these other things I need to do, and I have all these goals, and I have this specific pie of success that I have defined. I can sacrifice things in the name of pursuing that. And it won't affect my health.